This is a muscular anatomy review of the wrist and hand with focus on the muscles that flex the wrist and flex the fingers. Beginning with our wrist flexors, we will talk about three primary muscles: the flexor carpi radialis, the palmaris longus, and the flexor carpi ulnaris. Looking at the anterior aspects of the forearm here, we will remove the pronator teres so that we can just focus on the muscles at hand. No pun intended. So beginning most laterally off of the medial epicondyle of the humerus is the flexor carpi radialis muscle. This muscle runs from the medial epicondyle of the humerus and inserts onto the base of the second metacarpal, as you may be able to see there. This muscle acts to flex the wrist and abduct the hand, also known as radial deviation. This muscle is innervated by the median nerve and receives blood supply from the radial artery. Moving medially, we see a very small tendinous muscle that is not always present in the forearm, wrist, and hand. This is the palmaris longus. The palmaris longus originates from the medial epicondyle of the humerus and inserts onto the distal half of the flexor retinaculum and the palmar aponeurosis. So it actually doesn't have a bony insertion. The palmaris longus acts to flex the wrist and maintain tension on the palmar aponeurosis. It's innervated like the other flexors by the median nerve, and it receives its blood supply from the ulnar artery. Finally, looking medially, the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle originates from the medial epicondyle of the humerus, but interestingly, it also has some attachments more posteriorly running onto the olecranon process of the ulna, and it inserts onto the pisiform, the hook of the hamate, and the base of the fifth metacarpal, as seen here. The flexor carpi ulnaris acts to flex the wrist and adduct the hand, or ulnar deviate the hand. Because of its more medial orientation, it is actually innervated by the ulnar nerve, and it receives its blood supply from the ulnar artery. Looking at the muscles that also act upon the fingers, we'll talk about two: the flexor digitorum superficialis and the flexor digitorum profundus. So beginning with the flexor digitorum superficialis, this muscle originates from the medial epicondyle of the humerus, but it also has slips that attach onto the medial or ulnar collateral ligament, the coronoid process of the ulna, and the superior portion of the radius. The superficialis inserts onto the body of the middle phalanges of digits 2 through 5, which you may be able to see there. And because of its insertion onto the middle phalanx, it acts to flex the fingers at the proximal interphalangeal joint and the metacarpal phalangeal joints. This muscle is innervated by the median nerve and receives blood supply from both the ulnar and radial arteries. Sitting deep to the superficialis is the flexor digitorum profundus, outlined here. The flexor digitorum profundus has an origin onto the proximal 3/4 of the ulna, as well as the interosseous membrane between the ulna and the radius. So this is our first muscle of the flexor pronator group that actually does not cross the elbow joint. And as you may be able to see if we look distally here on the fingers, its tendon actually attaches all the way out onto the base of the distal phalanges of digits 2 through 5. So we sort of have this orientation of superficialis branching and making a Y onto the body of the middle phalange of the fingers, and the profundus running through it onto the distal phalanx of the fingers. One way I was always taught to remember this is that it's only fun if you go all the way with something. The flexor digitorum profundus has the action of flexion at the DIP joint. It also, like with the superficialis, is a weak wrist flexor. It's innervated medially by the ulnar nerve and laterally by the median nerve, so a little different here. And its blood supply primarily comes from the ulnar artery.